Heckled and jeered, Hong Kong's leader faces more calls to step down as politicians disrupt her annual policy address. Can Carrie Lam hold on to her job? And what needs to be done to end 4 months of unrest? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Sohail Rahman. Hong Kong's Chief Executive Carrie Lam is struggling to maintain public order. There have been 4 months of anti-government protests that have turned violent. Protesters have been calling on Lam to resign. She's refused. Lam's now hoping to move on with a new legislative agenda, but it seems she's struggling to do that as well. Opposition politicians twice shouted down her annual policy speech in the Legislative Council. Lam had to resort to giving a pre-recorded address through a video link. The protest movement is once again calling on her to meet their demands, which include direct elections for the city's leader, amnesty for arrested demonstrators, and an inquiry into police actions.
Our 5 demands are very clear, not one less. And I really urge her, if she can't govern Hong Kong, and she has no determination to govern Hong Kong, and she has no ability and even incapable in administrating Hong Kong, please step down.
But Lam sidestepped these demands and urged people to end the protests.
We're very worried that a small number of people have escalated the level of violence. Perhaps some people don't like the government's condemnation. But we must ask, what can violence achieve for Hong Kong? Can it solve our crisis or pull us further away from our goals? I urge, once again, for everyone to cherish the city and let Hong Kong return to peace.
Some rights activists have condemned Lam's address as pointless.
I think if today's most pressing concern isn't addressed, along with the fact that Carrie Lam's government has not responded to the people's 5 demands, then I think this policy address has no meaning.
For 4 months, she claimed that she will dialogue to the community, but she didn't. She did it for a show, a political show.
Let's introduce the panel on today's Inside Story. In Hong Kong, joining us via Skype is Emily Lau, Chairperson of the International Affairs Committee of the Democratic Party. Welcome. In London, Roderic, a fellow at the Asia Pacific Programme at Chatham House. And also in Hong Kong, Reuben, a professor for Asian Initiatives at the IESE Business School. Welcome to all of my guests and to you here on Inside Story. Just to get a brief snapshot of what we feel about what's been going on in Hong Kong, can I just ask you the generic question? Emily Lau first. The people there have varying opinions about what is going on and how they feel about Carrie Lam as we know it. The political divide could not be wider at this moment in time. What do you make of certainly the last few hours that we've seen Carrie Lam in the legislature?
Well, as you can see, Hong Kong is split asunder. People are very unhappy, and I think many, like me, want the situation to scale down. But Carrie Lam is just doing the opposite. So we don't know when this unrest is going to end.
We shall see. Roderic, in London, perhaps an impartial view from thousands of miles away. Certainly, what's your view of what's going on at the moment?
I think it is very difficult still to see a political end to this. And surely the way forward is through politics, because the Hong Kong government treating this solely as a law and order issue has not worked. There is still strong support in Hong Kong for changes and reform, and the Hong Kong government does not appear to be listening.
Reuben, a political view, but with an economic background to your certainly portfolio. What do you make of this?
Well, we have to look at this in 2 ways. One is the short term, and one is the long term. The short term, there's an anger, a seething anger, and that has to be addressed quickly. And then the long term, I think, is quite good. It will be good for Hong Kong and China in general. So we are looking at a one country, two systems. So there's a tug of war. And what we are seeing is the tension between the one country and two systems. But when this is over, it will be a lesson for China. It will also be a lesson for Hong Kong.
Indeed, and we'll try and pick all the bases and touch all the bases along this conversation through Inside Story today. Emily Lau, let me just come back to you. On Wednesday, we saw Carrie Lam fail in her attempt to address the legislature on her policy statement. Yet we have a video recording, obviously, of what she had to say. And she talked about financial help, sort of low-income families who need better housing, and a promise to listen and engage with opposing politicians and the public. She said this in a variety of forms. I'm paraphrasing here. Is it enough?
Well, when you look at what happened in the Legislative Council complex, if she is sincere in wishing to engage with the pro-democracy politicians, I don't think they would have treated her like they did today. I mean, she has no interest in talking to them, and that's why they are so angry. She's going back to the Legislative Council complex tomorrow to answer questions. I don't think it will be any different from today. So this is crazy. She really has to go out and engage and listen to people who have very different views.
Roderic, why in London? Has the tipping point been reached to a certain extent for Carrie Lam, in that so much has happened since, April earlier this year, when all of this began with the anger over an extradition legislation that would have maybe taken suspects from Hong Kong back to the Chinese mainland? Has so much happened in the time span that it's sort of too late to turn back, and some new way of engaging the public has to be thought out beyond Carrie Lam? Is it a case that Beijing has to get involved in some shape or form, or give her guidance at least?
I think, I'm sure Beijing is telling her quite a lot of what to do and say. I think Beijing is still very reluctant to be seen to be acting directly in this matter, and prefers to leave it to the Hong Kong government. But behind that are very strong statements that people should not expect that they can get away with, from Beijing's point of view, the violence and these kind of things forever. But I think for the moment, Beijing is still not interested in involving itself directly, prefers to use Carrie Lam, and she has completely failed, as Emily said, to both to engage in anything other than a formal kind of a way, and to listen, and more than to listen, to respond to the reasonable requests that have been coming in the past, and that this failure to listen or respond is exacerbating the violence in Hong Kong at the moment.
And Reuben, I'll come to you in a moment. You're nodding in agreement. But just one quick one to you, Roderic. I mean, is Carrie Lam between a rock and a hard place? Because basically, if she then goes into the legislature on Thursday, as we expect she will, and she receives the same sort of reception, where does that leave her? Because you can't keep giving video messages to the Hong Kong people, and certainly to fellow politicians who expect to be able to engage, even if they disagree with the leader of the administration on the island.
I think this is the real problem that Hong Kong faces at the moment, that there is really very little trust in the Hong Kong government and in the police forces, but there's also sort of no real avenues for sensible political discussion, because as we have seen, the sort of Legislative Council, which should be a real debating point, has not been able to do so. And part of the reason for that is the intransigence of the Hong Kong government. But part of the reason is also that it's very difficult for the protesters to find a political voice, and somehow that needs to happen.
Reuben, can I bring you in here? You were nodding in agreement with what Roderic was saying.
Yeah. 3 months ago, I thought Carrie Lam should stay on to sort of manage what's happening. But now, after 4 months, I think she should go. And I think now the protesters and also the opposition, the Democrats in the LegCo, should ask Beijing to just let her go and replace her with the number 2, Matthew Chang. Because now she has become a hate figure. So the anger has to be solved psychologically. So people are very angry just seeing her face. So there are actually several people that are hate figures that inspire anger in the protesters. That's Mrs. Lam, Teresa Cheng, which is the Secretary for Justice, the Secretary for Security, John Lee, and the head of the police. They should all disappear and be replaced by their number twos, just psychologically, just to have a kind of, to quell the current emotional anger of the people. And then Carrie Lam should say, okay, I go, and then what happens next is for Beijing to agree that new faces should appear, because some people have to take responsibility for the past 4 months.
Indeed,
as I said, this is the short term.
Yeah, indeed, those are the talking points.
Remove all of these hate figures.
Yeah, indeed, and those are the talking points that we've certainly touched upon in many inside stories. And of course, Emily, you're smiling away through that response from Reuben, and I do understand, because even if Carrie Lam and her top tier of government officials step aside, and you then have the number twos, as is stated, taking their position, the issue is still, is it not, about voting one person, one vote, and voting for the people that you want in charge rather than being imposed upon Hong Kong by the leaders in Beijing. The fundamental issue is still about being able to vote, is it not, on the people that will administer the island, and they should be the choice of people from Hong Kong.
Absolutely right. But I agree that these people who have made such a big blunder and have caused the biggest crisis in Hong Kong, in whole of Hong Kong's history, everybody agreed this is the biggest crisis, and we don't even know when it's going to end. So I think those people have to go, and I fully agree. So we should have, of course, the chief secretary will be acting for 6 months, and then we'll have a by-election. And you're right. This committee of 1,200 people, mainly drawn from the business and political elites, they will choose another one, maybe another Carrie Lam. But still, whoever made the mistake has to go. And then, of course, we will also have to address the problem of how to give Hong Kong people the right to choose their chief executive and all members of the Legislative Council. But even then, I think this independent inquiry that so many Hong Kong people want, whether they are pro-Beijing or pro-democracy, many of them support this inquiry, which is a very reasonable thing. And we've had such inquiries in the past. So it's not as if we're asking for independence. So I think both will happen. Some people have to go, but we still need the inquiry.
And of course, Hong Kong obviously is a city-state. And can I bring you in here, Roderic? Why? When you have issues that Carrie Lam mentioned today that sort of was trying to appease the public, which was about housing, about helping those on low incomes to be able to afford the right type of housing, having a conciliatory nature, she actually said that politicians need to be aware of, and I paraphrasing here, feeling the need of the people, the need to be tolerant and open-minded and listen to all views. I got a sense in that speech on Wednesday that she was trying certainly to reach out. What was your reading of the way that she tried to form her words for the public in Hong Kong?
I think you're right, in a sense, that she was trying to reach out. She was using this idea that there is a strong economic motivation behind the demonstrations, and that if you could satisfy the economic problems, then some of the causes of the grievances would go away. But I think that's sort of putting the cart before the horse in a way, that the problem really to me is a political one. It's not an economic one. The second thing about listening to the Hong Kong people, well, we've heard this so many times before, and the fact is that although she may listen, there is no evidence really of her properly hearing those voices or responding to them. And I think as far as putting a new team in charge is concerned, I mean, that is not going to solve the problem if the new team come up with the same line as the current administration is.
It's interesting, there's various articles being written globally. I just wanted to pick a few of them out for Reuben Mondejar. The Guardian, a gentleman called Howard W. French, he's an academic and an author. He suggested that several decades ago, when China began this idea of sort of creating wealth, an open market, that it would create a much richer middle class that would maybe tip the pendulum in the future when they would want more participatory behaviour in electing their officials, because there was a wealth and therefore strength came with money, and therefore democracy would lead people to head in that direction. Has it backfired slightly in the way that China's policy has developed over 20, 30 years, that giving people the opportunity to create money, create wealth, has also said, well, we want some more say now in politics, in democracy, inverted commas?
Yes, actually, I think what is happening in Hong Kong is a precursor for what could happen actually in China later, because they are passing precisely through that stage in economic development, in market economics, in which after you have already tasted the full gamut of the basic needs of Maslow's 5 needs, then you want to have a say in how you are governed. So China is not yet at that stage, but wait for maybe 20 years and they could be at that stage. So I'm not saying that we are not heading towards that direction. I think that's where actually China is heading.
Indeed.
So
it's
just a question of now it's Hong Kong's turn, but later it could be China's turn.
Indeed. Let's just give our viewers a little bit more sort of backgrounds. I'll be coming back to Emily in a moment, because we'll take a closer look of the impact of those protests on Hong Kong's economy, because the numbers of visitors to the city fell by nearly 40% in August compared to the previous year. Arrivals from the main tourist market, the mainland China, dropped by 42%. Now, Hong Kong's biggest airline, Cathay Pacific, has experienced a string of resignations, while some workers have been suspended for taking part in those protests. And last month, credit agency Fitch lowered Hong Kong's rating. It blamed the protests for destabilising the region's business environment. Emily, can I come back to you? Because obviously you've got a great sense, obviously, of the politics of the city. You know how it operates, both on the civil level and on the economic level. How much of a hit, just from a political point of view, from your position, have these demonstrations had on the economy of the island? We've touched upon it, not in our news broadcasts as well, but also on Inside Story many times. But we're in October now. We're several months from down the line from when these protests began, and it's becoming pretty serious.
Oh yes, it's very serious. Many restaurants and shops have closed down, and there are more closures on the way. And I guess people have been laid off, and there will be more unemployment, and the people are really very unhappy. But there is still a strong sympathy for the protesters, because actually the people themselves want those demands to be met. But of course, not too many people support violence. That's why I hope the protests can continue. But I hope they will be more peaceful. And every time when you have a protest, if you have 100,000, 200,000 people turning out, it's very good. But of course, it affects business. Tourists are not coming. The conferences, the exhibitions, many have cancelled. And I think Singapore is benefiting from it quite a lot. And some people are sending their money to Singapore and elsewhere. So it is bad. So that's why I hope the business community will speak out. I hope they will find some courage to speak out, because their hotels are empty, their restaurants are empty, their shops are empty. So I think it is hurting badly. But Carrie Lam, she has to be pushed or persuaded into accepting the people's demands.
Okay. Let me bring in Roderic here, because when you hear sort of the financial hit that Hong Kong's taken, again, somebody else that's been writing in the South China Morning Post, Dr. Shirley Zi Yu, she's a senior visiting fellow at the London School of Economics, she's a fellow at Harvard Kennedy School and a former news anchor for the state broadcaster. Roderic, she says that China would rather see Hong Kong lose control of its financial gateway than ever cede political power. That's quite a dangerous statement in lots of ways to come from an academic, but one that, you know, perhaps should be considered and talked about even at this time.
I think it is sensible to consider it. I don't think we're at that kind of turning point at the moment. But yes, I think that is one of the sort of fundamental and, if you like, unchanging elements in this series of problems that we're facing at the moment. And that is that Beijing ultimately puts politics before economics. And its interests in Hong Kong are huge from the economic side, but they would be prepared, if necessary, to compromise them in favour of their politics. But we're not at that position yet. Hong Kong has been damaged. The economy has undoubtedly been damaged and will suffer more damage. But it is interesting, actually, that overall confidence in Hong Kong seems to remain pretty strong. And as Emily was saying, you know, the people, significant numbers of people are still prepared to turn out on the streets to protest. And that would not be happening if people were putting their own short-term economic interests first.
Indeed. Reuben, can I bring you in here then? Because with the thought of Hong Kong being a financial centre and still being at the heart of these protests at the moment, then how important are financial centres such as Shanghai, Beijing and Shenzhen in terms of the bigger picture for China itself when it calculates their importance and Hong Kong's importance?
Well, there are about almost 400 international banks in Hong Kong. It's the 5th financial center of the world. Shanghai cannot compete with that strength of Hong Kong. And you can just see the reaction of the world, the European Union, the United States, many other countries are, you know, on Hong Kong's side, despite China's heavy rhetoric. So it means that the soft power of Hong Kong is larger, actually, than the soft power of China. So in that sense, China has to change. I have seen China change in the past 4 months. For example, earlier they were saber rattling, you know, organizing military drills just across the border. Nothing happened. All the party of China for their 70th birthday was overshadowed, was eclipsed by the protests in Hong Kong. And that's what the world was seeing. And that's what the world was siding with Hong Kong about. That it's not so much just the economics, but they understand that, you know, if Hong Kong is truly a two-systems experiment that China should allow, because China is trying to paint Hong Kong as a separatist. It's not a separatist movement. They want universal suffrage. They want to vote for someone who can speak for them. And this is the problem. It's not a separatist movement. And China tries to sell this idea that, you know, like yesterday, President Xi Jinping says that anyone who tries to split China will be crushed to the bones. That's nothing. That's not how the world understands Hong Kong. And I think, as I said, this is no matter how much hard power China is, they cannot defeat at the moment, still, Hong Kong is very strong in that soft power, especially in terms of its financial strength.
OK, that's great, Reuben. Let me just give Emily the final word. We are coming to the end of the programme, Emily, and just wanted to basically bring in the fact that, you know, as Reuben suggested, the international community is watching, especially the United States, and the House has just brought in new legislation to say that they are watching Hong Kong very carefully, and they will decide whether it has that special trade status in the future if the realities on the ground don't improve. Is that an encouragement? Is that a warning? How do you read that in the context of politics of Hong Kong and how it could be received in Beijing?
I think many Hong Kong people welcome the passage of that act in the House of Representatives, but whether it will actually become law remains to be seen. What will the Senate think and what does President Trump think? But it's good for them to penalize officials who undermine human rights. But of course, we don't want them to take Hong Kong out of the separate customs territory treatment. That would hurt the whole of Hong Kong and will be a bigger blow to the economy. But if they can send a signal to these nasty people and say, if you undermine human rights, we will ban you from coming to America, and we hope the UK and other countries will do the same. And also we will freeze your assets, because as you know, many of these people have assets in the West, and they send their children, their families over there.
Okay.
So I think that would be a very powerful signal.
Indeed, and there we have to leave it, but I'm sure that'll be a topic for another Inside Story in the future, Emily. Thanks so much to Emily Lau and Reuben Mondejar in Hong Kong, and of course to Roderic Wyatt in London. To all of my guests, thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story, and thank you for watching as well. Now, you can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com, and for further discussion you can go to our Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter, and our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Sohail, Rahman, and all of the Inside Story team, thanks very much for your time and your company. Bye for now.